It's true. I was like, wow, I'm not.
So this is a work session with the presentation of initial draft of proposed updates to chapter 7, planning and zoning. And just navigating Zoom here. Yeah, that's about it. I'm going to turn it over to TJ and Katie, who are both here.
It's called meetings. It's a regular meeting of the planning commission.
Oh, sorry.
So
Roll call. Regular meeting of the planning commission. Can we get a roll call of attendance, please?
Yes. Commissioner Franz.
Here.
Blisk.
here,
Nelson.
Here.
Petroselli.
Here.
Chair, Mayor Pro Tem Meyer.
you're muted, Russ.
Meyer. I see him. Mayor Clark
Here.
and Chairperson Montague.
Here.
And I'm here.
Thanks, Russ. Yeah, sorry about that. So now we're on to Ridgway Municipal Code, Chapter 7 proposed update outline. Now I will turn it over.
Thank you. Just going up my share screen. Okay. Good evening, commissioners. Thanks for having us here in person again. TD Campus, CPS, and TJ.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, of course. Our pleasure. So what you have before you tonight is a draft, and we want to emphasize that it is a draft. So we know you probably found some glitches in it as you started skimming through it and reading through it. So we recognize that we have errors in there still as far as grammatical errors and things like that. So we are obviously going to be putting a lot more time in to clean it up and make sure all that is taken care of. What we really want to do tonight is go over with you the main layout that we're proposing, along with the main policy changes. And we want to get your feedback on behalf of the town as far as if you think we're on the right track with some of these questions we have for you, or if you think that we need to maybe relook at how we're doing certain things. So we kind of have a list that we're going to go through for you tonight. And then we obviously want to hear from you. I'm not sure if you want to share how much time you put into reading it, or if this is kind of new tonight. So feel free to ask questions. We did want to let you know that we are going to actually give you another 2.5 weeks to take a look at these documents. And we think hearing us present tonight will help you realize what we're looking at and the track we're going, and keep those things in mind as you then look at the documents further. So we have a date I'll give you at the end, December 16th.
So, sorry, just real quick, we did not try to disrupt your Thanksgiving weekend with a bunch of code reading. Although that's probably how I came across, so sorry, but thank you for those who did.
Yeah. So we're gonna go through it tonight, and then we're gonna give you a couple more weeks to review it on your own and get comments and questions over to us, okay? So just tonight, a quick overview. We're gonna give you how we went about our approach to making the updates.
Can I interrupt for just a second?
Yes, please
You
do.
said something about December date.
Yes, the 16th. I'll give that to you at the end when I have it written on the screen.
Okay.
That way I won't mess up.
Okay.
So that'll be at the end of the slides. So we're going to review kind of the approach we took to making the updates that are before you. And we're going to review the general layout. So as we take a look at things, you know how they're flowing together and where everything is. And then we're going to give you some policy change questions that we've been looking at and discussing internally. And then open it up for general questions and discussions. So I am happy to have interruptions along the way. Please, as we're talking about topics, it's better to interrupt while we're focused on it. And I think that will help facilitate the conversation. So just let me know if you need more information or want me to slow down at all also. Okay. So what we did was we took zoning, subdivision, plan unit developments, definitions, all of this, and we put it together in one chapter 7. So you now have chapter 7, land development regulations. And within that chapter, you have main sections. So it starts with general procedures. It goes into planning commission and board of adjustment sections. Those three, 1 through 3, were combined into one document for you because they're pretty brief, and planning commission and board of adjustment are exactly as they already are in the code. So you have one PDF for those first 3 sections combined. Yes.
I think this is probably an okay time to bring this up. I just was surprised that you decided to change the name of this whole package to land development regulations instead of land use regs that it's been called all these years.
We did, and I'll explain why. And good, we'll see, you did read it.
I did read it.
I like it.
Yeah.
Because it's more than just a use. You're looking at subdivision regulations within this also. And so it's really looking at all these different land opportunities with land that people can do, whether it's subdividing or it's looking at uses or different zone districts. So we thought of a more comprehensive title might be better considering what's under it. But we're happy to take feedback. This is all up for discussion.
My feeling was kind of the opposite, is that
Okay.
development is the wrong word because it's not just about development.
Okay.
You know, it's about land use includes development and all the other kinds of, like, so much of it includes things like boundary adjustments that aren't necessarily development related. They're just
Yeah.
changes in use, changes in zoning. So I've always liked land use code, and that's something that seems pretty standard
Sounds good.
in municipality. In all the places I've talked to people about it. So I don't know, it's not a huge deal, obviously, but
Yeah.
it just struck me as kind of an example of how we're always trying to change things when change isn't always good.
That makes sense. Does everyone feel the same way?
I feel the same way. I think that's a good idea John has.
Yeah, I would agree too.
Okay, we'll go back to.
Thank
Yeah.
heavens, well, thank heavens for finding a place. You were gonna say something?
I was, because right now, chapter 7 is planning and zoning. Right, so that's where we're kind of going with that, like, that's not appropriate either.
Right, right.
But yeah, other than that, it's fine, so.
We'll take a look and take out the development.
Yes.
Great. Okay.
Lisa, see
And
this?
Just a second, Russ, I wanted to
Oh,
ask
sorry.
something.
Yeah, I just had a quick question on this Board of Adjustment. We don't currently have one that I'm aware of, and it appears to be pretty much the same thing as a planning commission. Is that something that we're required to have, or what's up with that?
You are, and it's existing in the code right now. So that's already been in there and it's proposed to remain exactly as is. It could be utilized with variances if you can use it correct. So in appeals.
My assumption was the reason we didn't have one is we haven't needed one, and when we do, we would call it together, and it could be
It's
this
always been-
body,
it's
or
this
it
body.
could be someone else outside if you chose the way that it's written.
We actually did need it at one point, and I was on it.
It's always just been the planning. commission.
Yeah, it's been a more ad hoc thing. And that was going to be one of my questions. It seems very formal in this document, and it's probably legally great that it is, but in fact, it turned out to be myself and Doug Canwright and one other person that you appointed. I don't think you were available for some reason at that point, but it comes up very rarely. However,
I like that it allows us to be more formal if necessary.
correct, and that's what we, that's why we formed it.
Yeah.
And so it does work, here to say.
So maybe just a couple of structural components to it. One, I heard, do we need it? Two, what's the role of it? Why do we need this? So one, you certainly want to always have and essentially need the opportunity to have a board of adjustment. It's a very different function than the planning commission. It could be the same people, but it's a very different function. You remember a few times during variances, like, hey guys, you're functioning as judge and jury right now, which is a very different role than as the planning commission with much broader scope. So I think we want to leave it in there.
Absolutely.
It's not clear, and actually, we were talking about this because we had a couple of appeal potential coming, and we were like, well, shoot, if that happens, we need to set up bylaws, rules, because what you need to do, that body, the decisions, appeals to that go to district court, right? And so it is a much more strict and rigid structure, just legally speaking. So I do think leaving it in there is best.
Definitely.
Does it need to be amended? Probably. But again, I don't know that we want to do that right now. And then, of course, as it comes up, we can certainly. So, yeah.
Thank you.
And then just moving forward with the list, zoning regulations is its own section. Subdivision regulations is its own section, planning and development and annexations also have their own sections now. And I'm gonna break these down, so just kind of wanted to give an overview of those main sections and headings that you would see as you look at all the documents. All right, so what we did within each section, we made sure that there were regulations, review procedures, and approval criteria. And that's really the bulk of when you're looking at development. What do they do? How do they submit? How is it reviewed? And then, well, if you're going to approve or deny it, on what standards and what criteria. So we made sure that those were in each section and each application type. We brought in information from the existing code and put it all over where it would fit. And where there seemed to be gaps and there was not existing language to pull in is where we inserted new language. We did not, anything that's being modified in detail is you're being told about it. It just looks completely different because everything has been completely rearranged. And we have added new language where existing language does not occur. Okay. Okay, so we did want to review. One thing we did a lot of reorganization on was supplemental regulations. So right now you have supplemental regulations in zoning, and it includes the, what you see up there in the black text or black font. So those are in there and they were all put in section 4 zoning under supplemental regulations, same exact language as you have right now. The green ones all came out of chapter 6, the building regulations. So these are standards that are usually what you see in planning and zoning, and what really the planning commission should be taking a look at, especially with things such as fences, especially landscape regulations and residential design standards. So we pulled those out of chapter 6, the ones you see in green font, and we put those in with the other regulations under supplemental regulations. So again, no text changes at this point. In the future, we think you're going to want to work on all of those and potentially modify them to be more what you want for the town. If anything changes or you feel like you're outdated, at this point, that's not what we're looking to do right now. Okay, so restructuring of the general zoning process. What happens when an applicant wants to submit an application? Through what we've written and pulled in from the existing code, and then we added a lot to this restructure, which is why we want to go through it. So we have, you start out, someone wants to submit an application or do some type of development or consolidate their lots. They're gonna talk to town, and we did, based on discussion at the last meeting when we were here, we did a lot of town manager or their designee for the records to the planning commission. So you do see that language throughout it. So it could go town manager or designee for a lot of who people come in and talk to and submit to. But basically, first step is pre-application meeting with staff. They say, here's a general idea of what I want to do. And staff is going to look at the zoning. They're going to look at the uses. They're going to go through the code and find the general process and requirements that that applicant would have to go through. That applicant would then look at the code, and they are clearly seeing exactly what has to get submitted for their application type. So we have a general application submittal requirements, and then we also have detailed lists for each application type. So basically you look at the general requirements, and then you go and you add the additional requirements that might be listed in the code. So again, hopefully, and this is where we're looking for your comments as you review everything, very straightforward for an applicant and for the town staff to understand the process of what somebody has to do.
So just real quick, it's straightforward for us who work in it all the
Yes.
time. it is very different visually and how to work within the code to access information, the requirements than it is right now. So we fully understand that. And again, just know that we understand that that's going to be a little bit difficult to understand how to navigate it.
And then the next
I thought it
slide
was
is.
easier. It's supposed to be easier for
It will
users.
be, yes, but it is different.
If someone's very familiar with it, they might go, oh God, this whole thing has changed. They moved everything at the grocery store and now I have to find it again.
Yeah, you got it.
Exactly.
And if it happens to be an applicant who works in a lot of different jurisdictions, they may be like, oh, they're following a general land use process potentially.
Isn't that amazing? So,
Just real quick too, a good cheat sheet as you're going through is the memo. That what we did in that, sorry, just real quick, I was just looking through it like, ooh. What we did in there is give you the proposed layout outline and a note of where that section came from in today's current code. So hopefully that's the match to play with there.
And I have to point out, you just said land use when you referred to.
yeah, you're fine.
Yes.
Already adapted. Okay, so you get an application in and you look at it and you say, can we check the boxes of what was required to be submitted on this list? That's all the completeness review is. And then, this is a little bit different. I want to note that staff then would send it out to referral agencies. And those referral agencies are based on what type of application it is. So obviously there's applications that are not going to go to the Forest Service. There's applications that are not going to go to most of the list in that code that we're proposing, but there are applications that are larger and more extensive based on where they're located and what utilities they're using, that it's nice to let anybody, any department or agency know about this project and let them comment on it.
And that's staff's responsibility.
Staff's responsibility, and it's usually done with a standard memo or email, and it's distributed how the town wants, whether it's usually we try to encourage electronic, and most referral agencies around the state prefer electronic these days. So it's a very easy
In this
process.
century.
Yeah.
Just comparing it to current. So currently, this is my own analogy, if you will, but I think the referral process is more of a notification process than it is an actual, hey, tell us how this application fits your rules and regulations. And so therefore it gives agencies like CDOT the ability to comment early on and us to facilitate the resolution of access permits, improvements, things like that. So right now what happens is when we notice for a public hearing, post a town hall, post a property, we send a notice to all the referral agencies. So they get 10 days to look it over and be like, oh, what the heck's going on? And what that could do in bigger projects is bring some major red flags at the 11th hour. So that's what we're trying to alleviate here.
One, I noticed in here in some places it said 10 days, because that's what we currently have. And I wondered if that's enough time.
Great question. You don't currently have 10 days. It's a lot longer right now
Completeness
for
review.
completeness review.
No, for the
Oh, the
agencies.
agencies.
I'm like, they don't respond to that quickly, do they?
It depends on the agency. We can extend that if we have it. We probably should have a little longer. So
Well,
I'm
and I
sure
think
glad
you
you
guys
got that.
know, but it was something I noticed in there and thought, wow, 10
No,
days isn't much time at all.
14 or 21 days is usually the standard, so we'll check that and change all those.
So in here, yeah, it's a minimum of 14 days for the referral.
And I also, while we're on the days thing, I noticed a place where it said, the days, it didn't say, it said calendar days. It didn't say working days. So like it included weekends in the days. And I was like, anyways, we'll get there, I'm sure.
We may not, so I'm gonna make a note.
Okay.
Okay, that's the good kind of detail that we want to make sure we're not
Mhm.
missing or having inconsistencies.
It seemed like, working business weekdays or something would be more appropriate.
No, the computation of days should actually be work business days,
Mhm.
not calendar days.
Good catch.
I read it too.
And it is specific later in the documents. It does stipulate working
Okay.
days rather than.
Yeah, and you're starting to see, I don't want to say flaws or inadequacies, but it took a lot longer than we thought originally, frankly, to just pull all the pieces together. And so what you're seeing is all the stuff kind of thrown together, and that's exactly, the intent is to move everything to business days. So that we don't get into weekends, you know, how many times do we get things at 5:30 on a Friday?
This is
Like
super
that.
impressive.
Right,
And
so-
you start to see the pattern, you know, as you're going through and it's like, oh, here it is again, here it is again. Which means that if you're looking at the specific thing, you don't have to jump all over the place. So it
Yes.
made sense.
Good, but I'm glad you're also finding these little glitches, so thank you. Okay, staff report, public notice requirements, public hearings and post approval are all straightforward. It was really referral agencies we wanted in that process. We wanted to focus it on here. Okay, so keeping it going here, zoning application types processes table. So this is a new table, no. Yes, sorry. This table is new in your code that we're proposing. What we did is we took application types. We added 3 application types, which I'm going to talk about on the next screen. So you have your application types on your left, and then this is the process that that application goes through. So at that pre-application meeting, that applicant is being told, okay, well, you're going to apply for it, and you're going to need a conditional use permit. Therefore, here is, well, a pre-application would be optional, but we would encourage it all the time because we do we think it makes applications easier to process for the applicants and staff.
I guess I would say like things like that, this table, this is what I told Kate before, if we spent our entire evening talking about this table or the subdivision table, that would be a success. Because we can fill in all the gaps and all the details. This is where kind of the meat of it is. So I would recommend that over the next couple of weeks, really digest this table. We went with optional. We tried to stick with what the current process is and not change the process, but just clarify it and simplify it a little bit. If there are some in here that you're like, hey, you know what, we want to require that, we certainly can. And frankly, from our standpoint, we probably say we would. Inevitably, those projects go a lot simpler when you have a pre-application meeting than those that don't. But I understand it's a time, cost, you know, the perception that we're delaying, taking longer, things like that.
But in the end, it probably saves time in
Yeah.
both cases.
It seems to, yeah. And these, just to also clarify, are the zoning applications, the separate table in the subdivision chapter for subdivision application types. So basically, you have the pre-application, you have the completeness review, you have the referrals, and again, some of these are recommended, some of them are required, some of them are optional. Notice of hearing, and then you get into the town manager and their designee, the planning commission, and the town council. And this is kind of the really meat of it, is who's having that final decision on this application. And then that works backwards, essentially right to left in a way of you have whoever makes the decision, and the 1 or 2 before them will be a recommendation to that decision-making body. And with that said, we want to note that there are a good chunk that are planning commission only that we're recommending for the decision maker. A big one of those is the new proposed site plan application type. And so we just want to highlight that we are proposing planning commission for a few application types. Okay. And we can go back to this, we can talk about it more. I'm gonna move on to the new application types to give you an overview, just so that you know exactly what they are that we're proposing. So 3 new types for zoning. Administrative adjustment is basically if somebody wants to adjust, say, a setback, so a dimensional standard, by up to 10%. They can go to the town manager or designee, they can apply for an administrative adjustment. There is still requirements of what to submit and a process for them, but it doesn't go forward to a planning commission or a town council. Where this comes in potentially useful if the town desires it is, let's say somebody has a deck that may overhang into the setback a little, and that the town manager and planning staff or may think that doesn't really need to go all the way to planning commission and town council for a variance. So if you're going to be within 10% of that setback, you can apply and meet the credit. If you meet the standards for approval, we'll be able to approve a very minor adjustment in dimensional standards. I'm kind of going to pause there because I want to know what your thoughts are on that application type. And if you feel like that is useful for Ridgway, or what do you think?
So previously that would have gone to the commission
For the variance,
as a
so it would
variance.
be a full variance where they had to meet the.
I like the idea. I was curious about the, is it 10% number and wondered if maybe we should look at that a little more closely and see if that actually makes sense in the case. But I definitely think it makes a whole bunch of sense for us to have an administrative adjustment procedure. Just a matter of kind of trying to figure out where to draw the line.
Yeah,
Well, the 10%, certainly when we're talking about distances or heights, yes, that sounds, but that sounds like it would be limited to distances or measurements, rather than I don't know, roof pitches or trying to pull up some other.
Yeah, parking count
Possibility,
requirements,
yeah,
for
parking.
example.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, some jurisdictions get more detailed, we kept it to just those dimensions.
yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, it's simpler that way, for sure.
And would the language then include, you know, town being able to say, no, we still want to take this up, you know, to the planning commission? So it's just an
Yeah, being able
option.
to
Yeah,
opt out.
yeah, to
Is
say
then-
no. It doesn't lock.
So-
it.
yeah, if we kind of just play it out, you probably know by now, I'm an advocate of thinking about the whole package, right? So say someone comes in, and pick on Jack. Jack comes in and asks for a setback reduction of, 9%. Preston says, oh, heck no, Jack. That's an administrative decision. That decision can be appealed. And we have an appeal process to go through. Right, and I'm a huge advocate of that. So then that starts giving the staff the guardrails. To say that.
See how many times
Yeah.
you guys is guardrails tonight for things to be free, the planning.
The other thing I would say is that, yeah, we can adjust, right now it is written specifically to dimensional standards. I also want to be clear that we're staying away from the term variance in this section, simply because variance does have a quote unquote legal term, if you will. And it means, you're varying from the code, and you have to meet hardship. So this is kind of a way around that. So that's why we're calling it something a little bit different, administrative adjustment. Another way that we can get into other criteria such as roof pitches, design criteria, things like that.
Yeah.
We can start calling it a waiver. And then we can put some subsections, right? So this is what I mean by like, hey, we now have a section to plug and play whatever we want in there, and everything else still fits, and it's not creating a ripple effect. So again, we don't necessarily need to make that decision per se through this process. Right? If we know what it is, sure, by all means. But now we have a place to just plug it in down the road when we want to.
It sounds like it gives it a framework for
Correct.
flexibility,
That's
right?
correct.
So that there's an option. And we don't get stuck in a corner and don't have any tools.
Preston, can you still see the people on Zoom? I just want to tell them that I can't see them, so if they want to say anything, they should chime in when there's a pause and not wait to be called on. Okay, thanks, guys.
Okay, so next new one is the minor amendment to a conditional use permit. So occasionally you could approve a conditional use permit, and then if somebody starts doing their final details on drawings or construction, they may realize that there's some technical engineering consideration, for example, that all of a sudden their conditional use that you approve may need to be altered slightly. Meaning slightly, we're not looking at a new use. They can't say you approved me for a retail store, but now I'm gonna go be a restaurant. Those are minor changes. And there is more language in here. I just pulled out one brief part of it. So what we're proposing is a new application process for a minor amendment to a conditional use. So that's a conditional use that has already been approved by the town and needs a very minor modification. It does then not have to go all the way back through the process.
And if I may, we went through one of these not too long ago, sort of, can't remember, it was the office use over off of Amelia, was it?
Oh, yeah.
Where the conditional use permit had language that it needs to be revisited every few years. And we're like, well, shoot, now we have to go through a full CUP process. Now we have a process that doesn't require the full thing, but allows planning commission to evaluate these on an as-needed basis.
Well, and it hadn't been being reviewed
Correct.
either for that very reason. So that, yeah, I like that.
And yeah, I did want to note, it is still proposed to go back to planning commission. So it's not going to be an administrative one for this, but it's a easier, more straightforward process for a minor modification. Okay, and then the other one is the site plan. Do you want to go into this one? Just comparing it to what's on.
Oh, I guess.
TJ can explain why we went this way then.
This one had me puzzled.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and I wondered what
Exactly.
the difference, this is maybe a foolish question, the difference between a site plan and a sketch plan.
Very big difference.
Very big.
Yeah, that's what-
Sketch plan is a PUD.
No,
All right.
sketch plan is the concept for, now here's the other thing, right? We're changing words. Right, and the way that words have been thought of in Ridgway for years. The sketch plan, and we'll get into the subdivision, sketch plan, preliminary plat, final plat are all subdivision processes only. We have decoupled,
This isn't.
yes. So we've decoupled the subdivision process and the PUD. Now PUD has its own thing that we'll get into. But one of the major considerations in starting this project was to evaluate the PUD process, or at least look at that. There's a lot of cumbersome requirements in that, but maybe it's not all warranted. So a site plan process is that process when subdivision, right, division of land or interest of land is not necessary. And when all the uses that you're looking to do on, or the use that you're looking to do on a piece of property is a use by right, you still have to go through this process. And so, and I would tie it to a current provision of the code that says that any development with more than one building on a lot requires a PUD or a subdivision. That provision is now going away, replaced with this site plan process. That's a very general overview of that, but that I think is the simplest way to think about it.
So this is
So-
also
So
a
the
process.
multi-site development permit that we used to do is kind of being replaced by this.
Correct. And so a site plan is the development layout of one property that is for any use other than single family or duplex. Okay. And so let's use a couple of examples. Yeah, we can talk about the museum, right? Staff has had multiple conversations with them about how they can expand the museum property, bring in different buildings. And that one frankly got all of us scratching our heads. Multiple buildings, two types of museums, one museum, two property owners, and it falls under the PUD. So thinking about that, it's like, well, what if we just did a site plan? That site plan requires all the same things. Public improvement review requires, public infrastructure, water, sewer, access. You would still be able to track or review, or you would review landscaping, architectural designs, elevations, parking requirements, all of those elements that we look at in the PUD process, but on a site specific scale. The other one that was a little bit odd, firehouse, right? We went through a building permit process for that. One of the things that came out through the building permit process afterwards is some of the site elements. If we had a site plan that went along with that building permit, we probably would have caught a lot of that stuff early on because they would have had to submit additional information specific to that site. Another one would be, we've talked about a piece of property, the triangle property up here, that potentially could do rental units, apartment complex. So say there's 14 buildings and a bunch of units in each, one property owner, all rental, and this is a hypothetical. Right now, that would have to go through a PUD process. That PUD process, and here's the difference, that PUD process requires a subdivision process. And now we're getting into subdivision stuff that we don't need to get into because it's used by right, you have all your properties, ownership, you have all your lot lines there. Now we're looking at the development of that property and the zoning requirements. So the subdivision, the supplemental standards, zoning requirements, the dimensional standards, parking standards, landscape, architectural designs. So it gives us this opportunity to go through there and evaluate the specific needs of that. If there is a requirement to have, say, public infrastructure extended, we have the opportunity to add a development agreement that would put the developer on the hook, just like we would now. So it provides the opportunity to evaluate it at a, I guess I would say at a much more focused staff level when it meets the standards of the code.
You're saying essentially it would, you'd be reviewed earlier through this method.
Potential concern.
So that
Wouldn't be caught in the building.
Correct.
Correct. Yeah. And so a site plan approval would be required prior to any building permit being issued for any use other than single family or duplex. Is the thought process there. Now this statement has been ingrained in my brain for years, so does that make some sense?
Yeah. It's simplifying the process, yay.
And after kind of going through it a little bit with Preston earlier, frankly, it's not. The only thing it's doing is getting rid of that public hearing process and the negotiation of a PUD.
How many projects in the last year do you think would have benefited from site plan?
I'd almost say all
All of them?
of them. Well, I shouldn't say.
No, not all of them, but
Things that did not subdivide property. Right, so rail, you have Riverfront Village.
Trying to come up
It
with
would be-
iron rail.
The building permit,
Oh,
Iron
okay,
Rail wouldn't
useful.
because they're doing a subdivision. But they wouldn't have to do a PUD. They would do a subdivision and a site plan.
I like this idea.
I'm sorry?
He likes it.
Jack likes it.
Yeah. They to go through, and we'll get into the subdivision processes, right? Now have a townhouse subdivision process that we can go through. Right, so it's not all, and this is where I want to be really cautious. Don't just look and say, oh, shoot, the PUD process caught these things, and now we're not. We have the whole package. It all still works together.
Is that, without trying to find it here on my computer, is that where you list the fourplexes, the various ways of developing individual
What do you mean by
I
that?
don't want to.
You talk about.
somewhere here you have
I'll eat with you later.
is that-
No, you don't have to wait to eat.
Jack, you should meet yourself. You're
He did.
talking to your friends.
Oh. Anyway, no, I'm just trying to figure out, I'll let you explain a little more and I'll,
You might be getting the where we're
Yeah.
getting,
yeah.
which is our next slide, but I'm
So-
not positive.
Okay.
so.
But I think we got at least the concept of the site plan
Yeah.
understood for the time being.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thanks.
So,
Okay, so again, that's the new application. So so far, we've kind of worked our way through, what are you doing? What application type do you need and what process are you going through? With that, now we break it down into the land use table and what use are you proposing? And this is where you're gonna get into, I think this is, okay, perfect. So you led right into the next slide. Well done. Was that today flowing in the right direction? Okay, so we have basically the whole table is in the documents you have. I want to give you a disclaimer. What we did was we took all your existing zone districts, we took all the listed uses and we put them into this table and we made sure we didn't duplicate anything. There is a lot of industrial use categories that are very odd for a use category. And we have not taken the time to put those in here. We're not ignoring them, but they haven't been inserted because it's gonna take a little figuring out where the best kind of main use category is gonna go for them. So we're not ignoring them. We have it flagged on our documents that we don't forget it. It just was gonna take a lot of extra time to get to that point, and we wanted to get your thoughts before we went too far. on this.
Just real quick, in the drafts that we provided, we've left those in the zone districts under performance
There
standards.
was other ones too. They're not all-
Sorry, never mind.
Never mind.
So they,
Your industrial zones are a little complicated right now when trying,
so what you're saying is that there are uses by right
and uses by conditional use.
in the I1 and I2 zones that aren't typically allowed.
Or just not even normal uses, like based on building size, even under like permitted uses, seems odd. It seems like we can separate, which is where TJ is getting to the performance standards that I'm gonna get into.
Just so I don't forget, I also want to ask that at some point in the last couple of years, since you guys have been involved, the I1 and I2 became I1 Industrial 1 and I2 Industrial 2. There's an extra number in
extra,
there. Can we fix that so that
Mhm.
it seems crazy that we've got those extra numbers in there? I don't know where they came from. But
You can do that.
thanks.
Of course. Okay, so you have this whole table. We have kind of subcategories where such as on here, you see agricultural uses is on the left. That's broken down in the column to the right of that by the types of agricultural uses that exist in the code today. So let's say someone came in today, and I'm gonna hop down to 3 lines, veterinary and clinic. You would scroll across and you would look at all your zone districts and you'd say, okay, it's a conditional use in the GC and it's an allowed by right in the I2 and it's not allowed anywhere else. This is exactly what your code says today, but instead of going to look at a district and then saying, oh, you want to do a vet clinic, I don't see it here. Is that even a use or is it not allowed? It's just
This is
clearly
great.
spelled out.
It's just-
Okay. Perfect. I said agricultural. and that's good. If I didn't make it clear, there's like household or agricultural, and then there's the subcategory. So we have the broad use category and then the subcategory.
Yeah, and the reason for that is obviously government is never as quick to adapt to private sector trends and things. So where the new trend in land use tables is this use category. And so each of these use categories on the left will have a definition and will be a little bit broader. And actually we could also add typical uses that fall in here are this, right? Kind of things like that. That can give, well, let me back up to the way it is right now. If it's not listed on there, it's not allowed, right? It's black and white, either yes or no. What this allows is the interpretation of the town manager to look at a proposal when it comes in and say, okay, it's not a specific use, but it kind of fits a use category. And therefore I can make the determination that it fits into this classification better. So it allows a little bit more flexibility in adapting to market changes. And of course, again, same thing, if someone comes in, let's use Jack again. Jack comes in with a use that we can't think of. And he says, oh no, it's on your daycare facility. Horrible example. Preston's like, no, not really. Well, maybe it could fit a childcare facility definition. And the answer is no, that then can be appealed too, right? So we have this cycle that helps refine these elements as well, and to be adaptable to new changes. Because we all know government is not leading the charge. But we can at least try to be there to pick it up when it comes around. So that is a big pain. But I think every community that we work in that has this appreciates that opportunity. So,
Now I realize what you want.
yeah, exactly.
Sorry. And then one other thing to add here, you can see there is an A for administrative approval required. This is something a lot of some communities use. We actually don't think we're not recommending this for Ridgway. We would like to remove the option. Right now, there is not an administrative review approval required. So an example of this is, let's say you had a mixed use building and it was going to go in the MR district. It makes sense, but maybe you just want to make sure that it's okay, but you don't want it to have a conditional use, but you don't want it to be a clear permitted use. Some communities will have an administrative approval. So in this case, the town manager, their designee, can look at that use for that zoning district. And if it has an administrative approval, then they can go ahead and approve it internally and say, yes, this use can go here in this zone district. We're not recommending that, but we wanted to throw it out there for you just to let you know it's out there as an idea. If you really liked it, let us know and we'll look at potentially changing those uses. Some of the uses are thinking about it a little bit more. It's also something you can consider in the future in Hopeway time too. So, okay. There is also the zone district dimensional standards, and they are existing in your code. You already have a really nice table with all of those listed. So that is copied exactly into the new language with the same wording. However, there's a lot of footnotes in that, and a lot of them are almost performance standards in a way, or different setbacks for certain zone districts. So let's say, and this isn't going to be quoted the right way, but let's say that MR district has a 10-foot setback in the alley, but there was a footnote that said it could actually be 3 feet if it's a corner lot, for example. There's like weird twists to setbacks and things. We would like to take those out of the footnotes and reorganize them to be more clear and easier for somebody to find and follow. But we didn't want to do that without hearing your thoughts on that. So,
I would say less footnotes, the better.
okay. Yes. Is that general consensus to that? Great.
I'm
Anyone
curious.
object?
No, when you are saying the MR zone, that's in Ridgway, there is no MR zone, there's just.
I was like, why? I'm like,
Mixed residence,
thank you.
that's relatively new, I keep.
Yeah.
Because like every time I look at it, I see Mr. and I'm like, that's just so random. Couldn't they come with a different initials?
I apologize.
No, you're good.
We
No,
did.
We haven't used that one.
you made me really worried. I totally messed something up, so I'm glad I did not.
I hear you.
Okay.
I remember.
Yeah, you have to read this.
All right, so your zoning districts are not being changed. Exactly what you have now is what is still in there. What we did is we kept the intent that is identical to what exists today. And then you have district standards. And what we did is basically are directing the person who's reading the code to look at the tables that we referenced and that you already have existing in the table of dimensional standards. So instead of listing it all out here for setbacks, we're saying, go look at this table, okay? And then performance standards is similar to the footnotes. It's been brought up a couple of times. Some of your zone districts have performance standards. The industrial both have a lot of them. Another example is your downtown service district. And we gave some page numbers if anyone wants to pull this up while they look. But essentially, similar to the footnotes, we're requesting to take these performance standards, and we may not be able to relocate all of them because there may not be a spot in the code to relocate them that would make sense. But if, for example, in your downtown service district, you have parking requirements, we want to just say you're going to follow your parking standards. So right now it says, for example, off-street parking per town standards is required, but businesses shall be credited with half parking spaces. So it has some extra things to consider but we want to take it out of the zone district and put it in the parking for that example, or pull it out of landscape, the zone district and put it in landscaping or lighting. So we'd like to, the performance standards are a lot to take in, I think, for a user, and it just seems pretty complicated. And here you're reading parking standards, but you have parking requirements over here. So we would like to, if it's okay with you, keep what you have, but make it look different.
And basically, yeah, try to just consolidate that. So like, for example, this one here, off-street parking, it's 2 or 3 sentences and one really long run-on sentence. Maybe we could just put in half parking spaces for every on-street park, right? Reduce it and tie it back. So it only applies there rather than being this more complicated component, because then now we have a duplication of standards too. So that's what, when we look through it, we're not just going to say yes or no. We'll look at the intent of that and try to put it in a place if we can. And then if we're like, hey, you know what, this doesn't make any sense, we'll bring it back to the next draft and say, hey, this is what we did. We didn't think it made sense, so we just kind of hucked it out the back door.
Okay.
So.
Okay, so I'm gonna pause back here. That was the zone regulations in a nutshell. Kind of the process, the application types, the uses, and the districts themselves. What also is in there that I kind of did at the beginning was all those special standards. So because they were all copied from the existing language, I didn't want to break them down and spend time on them tonight with you. So I just wanted to note that was kind of the other part of the zoning regulations, that they actually end with that part. So that's just all the performance standards, basically. Or sorry, not performance standards, but.
Okay, sorry, I thought you were raising me.
Okay, so now we're gonna move on to subdivisions, different section of code. And we are looking to suggest, get your feedback, especially on potentially having a different layout of the process for a subdivision. So we want to be really clear with you on making sure you know what you have today, what we're proposing, and getting your feedback. This is not, we think there's going to be some people who support this and some who don't. We are not set in stone on this, but we do want you to consider it and think about it and give us some input. So what we're proposing with your existing subdivision process first. An applicant comes in, they submit a sketch plan. It basically includes a concept plan and a narrative. Then the next step for them and the existing process is they submit a preliminary plat with the construction drawings. The next step is an applicant comes in and they have a pre-construction meeting. They then go out and they do the infrastructure improvements, and they're putting in your utility lines and those kind of high cost, but required for development improvements into that land. After the infrastructure improvements are signed off on, that applicants can submit a final plat, in which case they can then sell the lots and obtain and apply for a building permit. Okay, so process works. It makes sense to an extent. What it is doing is developer is putting a lot of their own high risk into putting all those improvements in. When they may find it more economically beneficial to potentially sell a few lots before they put all the infrastructure in. Get some money for this project to make sure that they can do everything they want to do.
I think it's also difficult when it comes to final plat to make any substantial changes as the commission, because you've already approved them putting in the infrastructure. And so I felt like we had one recently that we were kind of bound not to make substantial changes, and perhaps it's my inexperience, but the process seemed a little wonky to me.
Yeah, and I think that's correct. The current process, luckily, the final plat is a stamp,
Yeah.
right? It's just what was approved in final, simple form to get recorded, and create lots.
Yeah.
And that's fine, like this, that's fine. I'll go a step further, and I don't want to jump out on a limb, but just be clear that this is a change in process that I've been advocating for for a little bit, especially with staff. And we do have a lot to talk about on this, on staff. There's a lot of maybe not, the concerns is probably good, right? So we still aren't completely on board with this process at a staff level. And I think it's just understanding. But we wanted to at least get this to you, make sure you understood what we're doing and the pros and cons. Yeah.
What I'd like to know is where the site plan
Sure.
fits in there
Sure. So
for you, in your estimation, where
yeah,
it fits
so-
best.
Preston, is there a good major subdivision that came in with a non-residential? Well, let's use River Park. It's not. What's the one?
Parkside?
one- Is it Parkside? No, it's the one I keep picking all Jack's projects. The rezoning from light industrial to mixed residential. And I can't remember the name of the subdivision, River.
Well.
Oh, is it Glen Paul?
I don't think it has a name.
Yeah,
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 so remember we talked about that a little bit ago.
I can't remember the name.
Let's go back in time,
It doesn't have a name.
right?
Oh, good. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that, but everyone knows where I'm talking about.
West of the light industrial.
Yeah.
Yes,
To
so
the
this
west.
is
Yeah.
light
And
industrial.
light, yes, yes.
So that property and all of the residential homes to the north were platted all together. So it went through all of this through final plat. Now, remember, a site plan comes in with all uses that are not single family or duplex. So your single family homes would come in and get your building permit for that, each block. Now we have that industrial site that comes in for a warehouse. We now go through the site plan process for that. And then they come, that we probably should have put that in there, that then we just didn't have a wide enough
It'd be
screen.
nice,
But
but for us to know,
yeah,
Yeah,
or for me to know
Yeah.
anyway, where the site plan.
sure, it would come in just before building permit. And it's not tied to this subdivision process or any process. It is its own thing, if you will.
Right.
Um,
But it would apply to.
correct. Yep. So in this flow chart, it comes
Yeah.
after final plat, before building permit for a specific lot that is created through that subdivision process.
so they create the lots with the subdivision, and then if they want to build on it, if it's not a single family or duplex,
And they
then
have
it
to
comes to
say-
a site plan.
But you're not suggesting a site plan for the subdivision itself.
No, 'cause
Correct.
they put this
So let
subdivision.
me put it another way, because I made a note in the draft. In the 3 approval criteria section of the site plan section. So it's H3. Approval criteria, and I wrote, when would a site plan be submitted for approval and not be part of a larger application like a subdivision?
So it would be when somebody came to build a structure.
After subdivision's been approved.
And we do want to know it's not required for a single family or detached residence
It's only required for commercial and industrial
or multi-family.
or multi.
Yep.
And that's how it, in a form replaces what we've been calling a multi-site. development
Correct.
process.
Correct.
So the previous town authority came up with that.
I hate just jumping in here, but and interrupting, but
Go ahead.
I've seen this before in other municipalities. I think it's great because you get a whole lot more focus on the actual site. And I think the site plan criteria before the building permit is ideal. So
Makes sense, makes sense. And the thing I was gonna point out too about the slide this up now is that historically, there've been a few really what we haven't called major subdivisions in the past, but the bigger projects that just because of the onerous nature of the improvements that they needed to make, the SIA, the subdivision improvement agreement came into play. And we agreed to negotiate the SIA so they can proceed with a guarantee that the improvements would be done without them having to put them in the ground too early in the process.
And that's kind of where we're going with the standard process.
Yeah, and I think that makes good sense. We're basically, instead of making that an exception for certain projects, we're making it the standard. And I think that makes good sense.
I think,
And I know for a fact that things like I can never remember what it's called, the small home project over in Ridgway,
Smart comments.
would have loved this process. It would have made their whole.
well, so would Preserve have utilized this. This is correct. You know, they spent a shitload of money of putting in the infrastructure there, just as 2007 had, 2008, you know. They had a lot of infrastructure and, you know, and no customers.
Another one that would probably love this process would be Telluride Foundation in Yellow Brick
Yeah.
Lane, where now they are, well, from an affordable standpoint, they have to put in a lot of infrastructure. And then that has to carry on through the sale of property. If they were able to get final plat approval with the, now don't get me wrong, they are still obligated to put in the infrastructure prior to building permit coming in, right? So that's the teeth that the town has.
And we'll add, they're required to submit those construction documents.
Yes,
Preliminary plat, final construction and final plat. So you're not just putting things off, you're getting all the documents
Right,
in
yep.
place, so.
and really what it does in the affordable component is allows the sale of property, basically speculating, maybe, right, to help cash flow those a little bit better. Maybe. And again, I'm not a finance guy. I'm just trying to, you know, hey, how can we make that? Are there ways to make that a little bit flow a little bit better? So anyways, that's the concept. Again, like I said, well, we never went through the sketch plan, preliminary plat, final plat with an SIA. So this would require every final plat to have an SIA. That's different than today too.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the difference too, rather than the subdivision improvement agreement that requires, oh, sorry.
No, I'm just still learning.
So an SIA is a subdivision improvement agreement, and basically what it does, not basically, well, in this proposed process, it obligates a developer to install public improvements, water, sewer, roads, drainage facilities, whatever you really want to, you can put it in there, right? We talked about public improvements is the detention pond public improvement in the Yellow Brick Lane. You know, you put it in that agreement, you put in phasing requirements, you put in performance measures. Then there's an inspection process, an initial acceptance. And that's the town coming in and saying, okay, you have built it to town standards. We'll give you initial acceptance. Now we'll issue building permits. And you can now move ahead with things. So that's the physical transition between elements. The SIA in that, in both the current town process and this requires a bond of some sort of financial surety. We prefer letters of credit, simply because that's cash in the bank rather than a bond. But that's a different story. So basically what happens is the developer puts up money to, that way, if something happens and they're not able to finish their improvements, the town can hold that money, finish the improvements, and the project is not going to default. Right, so that's the big part. It's a lot more complicated than that, but it's essentially an agreement that obligates a developer to install public improvements to the town specifications.
Perfect.
Currently, the code only allows specific improvements to be covered by an SIA. And only, you know, we're going through this with, we talked about this with Vista Park Commons, where they came in and said, hey, we think we're ready to submit final plat. Joanne and Public Works went out there and said, no, you didn't do this, this, and this. They went and did those, and then they were able to submit final plat because they didn't meet that threshold yet. So does that kind of help?
Yeah.
So it seems like we like the direction of this and look forward to ironing out the details and presenting it to us again.
Sounds good. And like TJ said, we need to make sure we have all internal staff on board also.
Yeah.
So we'll give you an update at the next time, but it's good to get your feedback and see if we keep going that route.
Yeah, assuming you're leaving the next slide, beyond the other types of subdivisions.
Did you want to-
Well, just how does the other types of subdivisions play into this process?
Oh, I was gonna do that. Okay, but I wrote about it. So,
That's why
okay.
we're such a good team.
Yes, thank you. All right, so this chart looks very similar to the one you saw for the zoning application. So this is your subdivision applications. We do want to note, same as zoning, we did add some new ones. Then once, let me start at the top. You have a minor subdivision plat. And then going down, you have your major subdivision, which we just went over with the sketch plan, preliminary plat and final plat. And then we took existing ones that were out, that were in the code today, and we added a few new ones. We grouped them together under what we considered a re-subdivision. So the re-subdivisions are, in essence, a simpler plat. A lot of them, such as, let's say condominium or townhomes. You have, somebody came in, you already reviewed the project, you check the site, you know there's parking, then they go and they build their structure and they build their townhomes or condos. Well, they have to legally subdivide those in order to sell them. So once they get, for example, for a townhome, they get the foundation in and they know where the walls is, the surveyor comes out and they mark it on the plat, and then they go through the plat, so they officially create these units that they can sell. That process of creating what has already been approved and built and is just documenting walls for legal purposes, we're proposing to have the processes such as that go more as if they're a final plat. So they don't go through a sketch plan and a preliminary plat process. They basically get to just come in as a final plat. They submit required document and are still reviewed. We're proposing by planning commission. That is a change, whereas for right now, town council looks at townhomes. So we want to know we're proposing more planning commission authority for kind of the re-subdivision plats. Still not all of them, as you can see in the chart. And you can take a look at these on your own and really think about them. I don't want to put you all on the spot with what also planning commission decision maker on some of these. But we wanted to kind of explain the categories and why we think some of them should be an easier process also. And so,
I was gonna use two examples, real world examples to explain a couple of these. One, now I have to be careful because we have a few of these in process right now, so I don't want to talk about those. Can't, right? But one firehouse. Okay. Through that, they went through a building permit process. They got their building permit, they're under construction. It was really good to see. Although Katie doesn't really like the big drum in the back.
thought it was a creative development that they're putting in music up high. We go play.
There's a big story behind
Basic,
that.
but he gave me a little bit of info on that one.
So let's play that out. One of the things through the site plan, the building permit process with them in the plat amendment was that they may want to condominiumize one or two of the residential units in there. So now they have their building permit. Let's even say they got their site plan approval. They have their building permit, they're under construction. Now, before they get their CO, they want to condominiumize. They'll come in and submit for a condominium plat through this process to create that separate interest of that unit. And that doesn't necessarily need to go through a full review process in both planning commission and town council.
Yeah.
Yep, cool. So that's one. The other being, and this is not a current application, but we've talked about it, Iron Rail. So Iron Rail, they could do a site plan for the homes on that, right? There are a few, I can't remember what their final is now, but 5, 6 units. Rather than going through currently a PUD and a subdivision process that's quite complicated, if you will, we can go through a site plan process. Get them approval of multiple buildings on one lot. Get with the either condition or note saying, hey, you're going to condominiumize this or subdivide it into townhome lots later on. Now, after it's constructed, before CO is done, right? So before they're able to sell, they have to submit a townhouse plat, townhome. to create those party wall divisions. So again, it's a way to, I don't want to say help, facilitate a process, an approval process, a review and approval process that is more in line with the construction and financing process too. So those are two examples that maybe help.
This seems like a place where we could look at maybe in the future, trying to create some slightly streamlined fewer step processes for developments that have certain number of deed restricted units.
Exactly. And again, this is very, we don't want to dive too far into that, but we're creating this framework that I'm starting to maybe even see the gears turning and be like, ooh, we could do that, we could do that. And now we've created a framework that you can plug into different things.
Good stuff.
Just on the affordable housing, we did.
Yeah.
Confirm that we only put that
In the
in.
meeting so far.
So, that's one thing. I think we might have neglected to do that and put it elsewhere, but we'll consider that. Right now we have affordable housing components only in the PUD. We could put that elsewhere too.
We didn't, well, here, I'll wait 2 weeks. Okay, so that was subdivision, general. We didn't want to get into, like I said, the application types processes. It's all the same flow as the zoning. So you'll see the same breakdown of all the application types and the process people go through for that in that section 4.
So the differences are going to be public hearing versus public meeting, who's the approver, and the submittal requirements.
Okay, so now we're moving out of subdivision. So we're out of zoning, we're out of subdivision, we're into PUD process. The PUD process, essentially, the way it should be looked at is as a rezoning. So it's not a subdivision, it should be a rezoning, which is why we pulled it out of subdivision and we gave it its own section. There is still a lot, there's actually a lot more standards in it, a lot more teeth in it right now that we added. And we added also, along with the PUD zoning, the options for a major PUD amendment and minor PUD amendment, and I'll break those down a little on the next slide. But what we did want to note is that based on feedback we received last meeting, we put in PUD standards specifically for affordable housing and installation of PUD spaces, just to kind of get the town started a little bit on what they said they wanted to add a little bit more teeth into and requirements for. So the reason we didn't add it, and we can, to the other parts of the code is because we were trying to keep the existing language and standards as they were. So I think if you want to give us direction, then we'll go ahead and work on putting some more affordable housing and EV space and that type of thing, requirements into other parts of the code, such as development standards with the site plan review, for example.
So how will this show up? It's something that crossed my mind. How will this show up on a zoning map?
It's usually with overlay. So it's like say dashed or hash marks over. So you'll have your normal zoning map and let's say it's color coded. On top of that, let's say yellow zone district, you have hash marks, slash marks going across. You can see a red flag of this has a PUD overlay on it. Then you go and you pull that PUD development plan up. And what this is doing is creating that development plan, which potentially allows flexibility and compromise between the developer and the town. So the same thing you have now, but by creating the PUD, you may be allowing reduction in certain things such as cluster, smaller setbacks will allow you to do that in this development if you're going to give us a park over here and or preserve wetlands that we really want to see protected. So it's like the PUD is creating a compromise basically that still meets the town intent and what the town wants to see, but also may encourage more flexible development. And then, so when they come in for this PUD, you're getting a plan, which usually should be a narrative and a concept plan. And then they can go and subdivide, go through a subdivision process based, and you're checking it for the zoning that is in that PUD guide. When things aren't in the PUD, use the underlying zoning, which is why you don't take away that color underneath. So you have to keep both because the PUD will still, you're going to follow the uses that are allowed by conditional use or permitted use. So you're still looking at that existing zone district with a layer on top of it. So does that help?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a little more, but with that PUD process, people can also do a subdivision concurrently. So If they're feeling really confident about what they're gonna be proposing to the planning commission in the town, they could say, submit the preliminary or sketch plan or preliminary PUD plan. And also say the sketch plan for the subdivision. So you could kind of run these applications concurrently with each other, which also not only increases the efficiency of the timeline for both the town and the applicant, but it allows you to make sure you're seeing everything in line. So, or an applicant can come up with a PUD, work out the details for the town, and then at a later date, decide they're ready to start development. That's subdivision. So they don't have to be together. They can be, and no matter what though, it's zone rezoning and subdivision.
So that's the big concept. Right. We historically here said PUD is a subdivision. It's a plat. Now we're saying, let's separate the uses from the subdivision process.
So how would that look different at a hearing?
So I don't know if you remember the Yellow Brick Lane, but we had a development guide in there that format, from a format standpoint, actually kind of mimicked the current code. And we specifically said all standards in the underlying zone district apply unless they're amended here. So what we would do is we just look at those. So we would look at density, we look at setbacks, we look at from a zoning standpoint, right? It's what we're doing today. So looking at a text amendment to a code, if you will. And all that kind of stuff. Then they would come in and create and propose a development that meets those standards. Does that make some sense?
We let them have a little more density, as I recall.
Yep.
A little less than what they wanted, but a little more than what the underlying zoning allowed.
Well, actually, they got approved in the original sketch plan for 14, and then they came back and said, "No, we can't make that work. We only want 12." So they reduced their density for their design standards. Okay, but
By the way, it's Winterhorn.
yeah,
I don't know.
I don't know.
I just saw it.
It's going to be Yellow Brick Lane until the Winterhorn is up. At least I know that that's what everybody knows it is.
Yes.
So just, sorry,
No.
one other thing, how would that look differently? We would, rather than having one motion to approve the PUD and preliminary plat or final plat, it would be a motion to approve the PUD and a motion to approve the plat, right? So it'd be two separate actions,
But we get to see it.
potentially.
Yeah, if they,
One like Riverfront Village would only come in with the PUD. Right, not the subdivision. They weren't creating lots.
Except for their.
They're gonna condominiumize, so they would go through the PUD process, get the entitlements, go through a site plan process to get their approvals now, and then after construction is done, they come into condominiumize. And I know that sounds complicated. But if you think about it from a financial standpoint, they had to put a lot of investment in public improvements before they got the PUD approval. To then go back and say, hey, we got approval, investors, can you give us some more money for improvement? I know that's potentially a bad example, but that's how that works, I believe, on the financials. It's easy when money's flowing freely, like it has been. With a recession coming, it might actually be good to have this.
Correct.
So
Is the recession coming?
they all say it is.
Yep.
I haven't seen it.
Any overall general, before we flip out of this page, some thoughts on this? I'll get into the difference between major and minor. So major PUD amendment is basically allowing, right, this is if you already approved a PUD. So you have approved a PUD, you have a document, and now an applicant realizes, let's say they want to change the use that was in the PUD, the density that was in the PUD, or perhaps change the phasing plan that you had approved. Those are larger things that need to be considered, but maybe don't constitute an entire from scratch PUD process. So what we've done is suggested and created a major PUD amendment, and then that has an outline of what would need to be submitted and what would process that would go through. And then we also have a minor PUD amendment, which is a very minor amendment. Trying to think of an example of this one. We don't see minor, it's an option, but I feel like we don't see.
Yeah, it could be process. A general provision, similar to like. Oh, we needed, this is a technical change that we needed. I'm not really sure, but it's kind of that catch-all.
It's nice to have options.
Yeah.
It is actually, and I didn't think of it, so maybe a minute. Sometimes in the PUD amendment, someone may write something for parking or in the PUD itself. And then all of a sudden they realize they just want to follow the town parking regs, and they could just then change what they put in for parking requirements and modify it to say parking shall meet the town of Ridgway requirements. So that would be an example of a minor amendment. All right, so that was PUDs. And then we're not going to discuss this a lot unless you want to, but we wanted you to be aware we put in a new section for annexation. And this is partially in response to questions that arose with the preserve that came up. And so.
Which went to council. We didn't
Correct.
see it recently here.
Okay.
Correct.
But because of that, it was recognized by staff that maybe some more information is needed on annexations and the process for that. There are statutory regulations for annexation, but because you're home rule, you can make changes to them.
I read that section. It sounded pretty serious, as it should.
Good.
Yep.
And that was taken from multiple home rule jurisdictions, kind of assembled together that we thought would work well.
Like it kind of started with, we don't take this lightly.
I never should take it.
When how
Correct.
All right, so where are we? And we are gonna get to your, well, why don't we do your question? Well, I'll give you the update on timeline, and then we'll get to your questions in case we had questions about this too.
can I just check with my people online if they're good?
I'm good.
Okay,
Thanks, guys. Okay, so we were able to check off two things on our timeline so far. We got the scope refined and the restructure and update drafted. Three, we can check this one off soon for tonight. So where we need to go from here is we need to refine these updates. We know we have punctuation, we have grammar, we have different things we need to correct that we'll take care of on our end for sure. But we will also take the comments we got from you and incorporate those and keep going. It sounds like pretty much everything we've had is going where we were going. So we'll continue fine tuning everything with that. Here's your dates, December 16th, 2022.
5:01 p.m.
You're not proposing a meeting for that day. You're proposing that we get any input we have.
Correct.
and the meeting would be the 20th, or no meeting.
No meeting.
Oh,
No, this is just to get us comments for right now. We are trying to keep it so that you also hopefully can do it sooner rather than later, so it's fresh in your head from tonight would be helpful, I think for all ends. And then we're happy to facilitate discussions if you have more questions for us. So feel free to contact us.
Yeah, I think it's important for everybody up here, everybody on the planning commission to not put any value on that December 16th date. We should all get our due diligence done sooner than.
I can edit it right now.
so what exactly are you looking for?
Any questions, concerns, things that you, especially questions if you think you need clarification, or anything, because what we would like to prevent is coming forward in January and having some big red flag come up that we weren't aware of and that may potentially make a lot of sense or may need some thought and that not to be caught off guard. So whatever, if you think we're going the wrong direction, especially with something, I don't think we need direction on grammar, punctuation, mistypes, things like that. I feel confident that our office can handle all of that. So we want you to focus on the concept and does it make sense?
So speak now or keep your comments to a minimum.
I don't
We
want to
can
necessarily
start.
say that because I think that this is a really significant thing, right?
Meaning speak now before this December 16th date.
Hopefully, yes.
as much as possible.
Yes, but I should also recognize might have not understood something and it might come out still in January.
Well, an example I was gonna bring up just as a question, like. You've basically done an amazing job of extracting things from a lot of different places in the existing code, putting it into a new structure that makes a whole lot of sense to everybody here, I think, tonight, and then added some things, but you haven't gotten into the nuts and bolts of like, whether you're gonna look at the parking regs, for instance, and rework those a little to be a little more modern and cutting edge, and that sort of thing. There's a part of me that would like to see that before, but I understand that probably what you're asking for by the 16th is just, you know, what don't we understand? What don't we think makes sense? The nuts and bolts of things like parking are gonna happen in that January.
Unless the town, I think we would need direction from the town if they want us to dig in more because of the time being spent in the budget.
Well, you guys kind of said you were gonna outline things during this process that you felt needed updated and changing so that it wouldn't hold us up in this process, but that hopefully towards the end of it, we could prioritize and address those things.
Right, so I completely agree.
I
that-
just did something here and screwed it up.
What's going on, Jack?
I don't know. Here it is.
So one of the, I think as you're going through this, that's, you know, we put up here, you know, December 2016, and then applicant development, developer open house, we can talk a little bit about that. These were our original timelines. We're not on anyone's schedule except yours. I guess at the town council, because of the moratorium, right? That's what our goal is in this whole thing. So now, to the question there exactly is, while you're reviewing this, please let us know if there are things that we need to change and add standards, right? If we feel, if we collectively feel that parking requirements are a big enough issue that we want to make sure we're addressing, then let's make sure we're doing it. But then what we need to do is probably push everything back a month. That's a bad example, because parking standards aren't huge, but that's what we want. So between when we get back on December, when we get all of your comments in December, I think we're going to try and get internally that next week and say, okay, how does this change our scope and our timeline?
So are we getting a list from you of things you think need attention?
We can probably still put that together. We have not put that together yet, so I'm glad you brought that up.
Well, no, I think we put it together early on. I think we put it in our early discussions. You know, what we were suggesting is that well, the very first scoping discussion and that
Things like parking were mentioned. I don't think we've got it like a
No.
list that we.
No, but things like affordable housing components, green building standards, solar, right? Some of those elements were brought in. Wetlands, we do something like that. There's a lot that we could do. We've been trying to focus, and what we have been focusing on so far is just the reorganization. So that when you're like, hey, this is an issue we need to address, we have a spot to put it in, and we've already done the background work to make sure that we can do that without creating ripple effects through the code.
I'm good with all that, but I was
So-
looking forward to places where you guys pointed out you might want to put some attention to this. As opposed to us just coming up with the topic du
Oh.
jour.
Yeah, I guess what I would suggest is if you feel like as you reviewed projects in the last months or couple of year or two, and you found that there were some potential glitches in the code that you wanted to get cleaned up, such as the parking or things like that, you let us know that kind of thing that might be fresh in your head. And then I definitely understand what you're saying about the other standards. And we have not dug into the depth to say, should these be updated or not, but I definitely hear what you're saying. And we can take a
You know,
look at
just
that.
from your point of view, because you guys do this.
Yes.
To be like,
Best
This
practice.
is something you
Yes.
might want to update. So that
Yeah, it's like your travel home in that kind of section. It's
Yeah, that-
kind of
You guys just had,
easy.
you guys as the pros who are familiar with what the cutting edge current
Correct.
trends are in the planning world. That's where we're not pros here. We'd like you're.
Clearly.
Well, and then it felt like we would take that list and amongst us, we would need to prioritize that because there may not be time to address all those things right away. But like we could then let's try to do these 3 by a certain date and then we'll work on these ones or, that kind of thing.
I think we can still get that together. It's really gonna be looking at the.
So,
performance
Well, and I
decision.
think you guys have put together something that shows some flow, some organization of processes and stuff, which is great. But I think we would love your feedback from a current best practices perspective of where in that now reorganized process
Yes.
we need to look at
And that's really gonna.
what might be out of date.
Yeah, so maybe what I would propose, and I apologize.
You got it.
When we get out of the 16th, we'll add our 2 cents to that too. Right, and come up comprehensively. That's the thing, I don't want to delay this.
Right, and that was our whole point. We don't want to delay this process.
In full disclosure too, we did anticipate having the ability to make some of those recommendations or comments to date, but it did take frankly longer than we thought. To get where we're at today, so. What we'll do between now and the 16th is put some of that thought to it, and we have it, I know I have a document somewhere, we talked about a lot. And then, things like travel trailers, temporary use permits, utility setbacks, or utility easement standards, right? If you're trying to create higher density and having a 3-foot setback, but requiring a 10-foot utility easement, something's not meshing, right? So there's some of that stuff that might actually take a little bit longer, but those are the kind of things that you're talking about. And we can certainly do that. And what I would then, I guess what I'm thinking at this point is already based on this conversation, you might be pushing that all of these off a month. Just to make sure we're doing this.
Well, and again, looking for the list and then using that at the end, or we could do that while you're working, start to prioritize that stuff, but I don't intend for that to hold up this process.
Correct.
It was all about getting this done, and then when there's time, or if there's another period, there needs to be a moratorium, or if during application process, we start to work on those things. We hadn't figured that part out.
Yeah.
Joan has her hand up.
Yes, thank you. I just had a couple points to make. Throughout all of this, the one thing I did not see indicated, it might have been on one of the charts, is the application of how UROD plays on any of these pieces. I didn't see UROD included, and that does bode on, it does play onto some of the projects that'll be coming up. Also, just for clarification, I appreciate this. It's easier for me to read and follow a little bit. The one thing I did have a question about those, or rather a statement, is that the use by right parcel for museums, it is a one owner parcel. And then all of a sudden, the last thing I was going to mention is if there, I know that there's no consideration to change anything necessarily, but with regard to the museums, everything will be an upfront load cost of cash, and there are no site sales on any of the parcel. So with use by right museum, it's almost it's more difficult even for a museum complex than a huge development where they would be getting their monies back by selling the lots as they went along. and just something to consider. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want me to comment on the Riverdale overlay district? Your question?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Joan. This is Katie here. We did keep that overlay, the river overlay district in there exactly as is. We didn't propose any changes to, it's still a district, it's still an overlay, and it has all the same exact standards in it as of right now.
Oh, okay, thank you. No, I didn't see, I didn't think I saw it indicated in part of the charting, so I just thought that might have been an over, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. So we didn't put it in the chart, just to clarify, because it has kind of so much unique standards. So it's in there, it's still a district, everything's the same, it's just not gonna be spelled out in the chart.
Thank you.
Of course.
Are there any other questions? Comments?
I've got a comment here. I think that I'm really impressed with the way this has moved forward. I was kind of worried about this process when I first joined the planning commission. And I'm kind of impressed that we've gotten so far in one meeting. And personally, I'm fine with the proposed process changes. I think then kind of agree with John that the time is going to be spent when we start, for me, when we start looking at the land use by zone or the uses allowed in each zone. When we get down to the really into the nuts and bolts, like the easements and the stuff that TJ was saying. So I'm not really concerned if it takes an extra month. I think this is a huge process the town's undertaking. And I think if we need the time, we need the time. And I just wanted to state that.
So does that push up against the moratorium, or how does that?
The moratorium is the end of March.
Yeah, March 31st, the earlier of these code updates are March 31st, so if needed, the town council could consider address that deadline.
But right now you've built in an extra month here, which you're saying we may need, which is still good.
I don't think in a process like this, an extra month is a big deal. An extra 3 months might be a big deal, but 1 month doesn't seem like a huge deal.
Agreed.
And then, while we haven't lost anyone yet, I did also want to note that a good idea came up, thanks to Preston, that we potentially host applicant developer open house in January to help anybody who's been working with the town already or is looking to work with the town, hear how the flow is going to work so they can start taking a look and understand how it works. So wouldn't necessarily, we could take comments, but it would be a lot of just what we did tonight of an overview of how is this new code flowing.
I think that's great for transparency.
So
It's essential.
I have no idea why Katie gave me credit for that idea, because it was not my idea, it was their idea. So kudos to them, and I also think that's a fabulous idea.
We're a great team.
Now that you said something, it reminds me, I had a question for you, Preston, not to put you on the spot, but I'm assuming, even though it hasn't been said, that you've been involved in this process, working with these guys and are quite familiar with and are approving of these changes.
That's correct, with the caveat that I have not delved into, I haven't read page for page everything.
So my last slide. Continue
Yeah.
internal discussions, and I was gonna note that, but yeah, keep going.
Yeah, and Katie's already noted it. Internal discussions need to continue. Bo, Joanne, TJ, Katie, myself still need to visit several times over the next month to make sure we're all on the same page. If you go back to, you don't have to go back to the slide, but the slide about the existing process as it relates to the proposed process. I mean, there's some big change. I mean, that'd be a pretty big change. You know, it's modifying some of the phasing and stuff, and you're really preserving the integrity there. But we're talking about taking an upfront heavy process where you require construction level documents at the time of preliminary plat and no longer requiring that. That's, in my eye, that's a big deal. I don't want to speak for Joanne. She will, I guess. I think that's a big deal. And you really want to ensure buy-in between all of this. And that's not to say that it's a bad change at all. I can certainly get on board, and Joanne certainly could Two, I don't mean to pick on Joanne, but I'm just trying to paint a picture and make a point. It's a big change and just really want to ensure that buy-in and really look at it comprehensively. And I think we've done when I say they, Katie and TJ deserve a huge round of applause for the work they've done to get to this point because it's been a heavy lift. But I look forward to reading through this more and having those conversations to ensure that from a staffing perspective, we're all on the same page by the next time we get to the planning commission level.
Do we need to look at any additional meetings, proposed meetings to keep this moving? Do you need us? And would the one that you said about with the open house, would that be a planning commission meeting?
Short answer is I don't know. What I'd suggest is let's get to the 16th. And then we know what we're dealing with.
Okay, and then we'll talk at this meeting after this is done about the December date for a meeting, or if that's changing to January.
So there's not going to be a planning commission meeting in December unless you all want to have a meeting in December for some reason. The regular meeting for December will be on January 10th.
And that's actually stacking up to be a pretty decent agenda. Just with application.
And so if we're going over this again, then maybe the need for an additional meeting, that would be 3 meetings in January.
So what I would suggest, and I don't know, I don't want to necessarily overpromise and underperform, but maybe, you know, if you all can focus on reviewing this, I know it's a lot. Believe me, I know it's a lot. But review it, digest it, understand it, provide some feedback, thoughts, questions, all of it. By the 16th, that following week, we get together as staff and figure out what we want to do next. And then through email, maybe Preston, we can kind of coordinate what our next steps are. Because I don't, you know, if it's maybe a quick meeting, I don't know what it's going to be.
Okay, I understand that. It's just, I think, important while we have everybody present to discuss what those possibilities, what we might be asking of people, so that it doesn't fall off the radar.
You know, I think it's maybe if we just wanted to, again, tentatively pencil in the regular January meeting to talk about it. That I think is probably realistic, meaning that we're already a month behind that schedule. But I think that based on everything that I'm hearing, I think that that's probably more realistic.
Are you saying that January 10?
No, the January 30th, whatever
So the reason
the
we're
regular January, correct.
Got it.
Will actually take place in January.
So the reason we're not having a December meeting is the holidays, people are away, or to give staff a break.
Yeah.
It's just something you typically do.
Holidays, yes.
Okay,
I wouldn't be here. It's almost every year.
okay.
And the 31st of January is the regular meeting.
So,
Thank
Preston,
you.
does that sound okay?
Thanks, Tom. Thank you guys.
So I had a couple of questions or comments. Yeah. So I'm thinking about this open house and I'm thinking about how much you presented that was still up in the air. And I'm just wondering and thinking about if I'm a developer and I'm coming to this open house and it's still not clear.
Correct.
That could create a lot of confusion. And I'm wondering if that needs to be thought about a little bit later in the process.
Essentially
But
in
still
February
holding
instead of
the
January.
space to be able to get.
Well, so, sorry, can you back to that? What we would do is push back the applicant developer open house. The way I see that is being a week or two before the planning commission hearing.
So it'd be between the refining update.
Correct.
Okay.
So if we push this back, it's pushing back the open house and both hearings. Because that will come just before the
You're ready to
hearings.
present. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. And then my other question is just trying to understand the process for some of these more specific things like solar and parking, those things, right? I'm wondering about, so if there are things that we need to change, and this is just as someone newer, if there are things that we wanted to explore and change, what would be the process for doing those outside of, you know, after the moratorium is lifted? And is that just, how is that?
The town can
Done.
initiate an amendment to the code. and then go through the proposed revisions, and then it would go through. Then go through the reading of the ordinances, and it would be adopted. So it's not a difficult process as long as you knew you're on board, and then you either decide who's gonna do write that language. Propose it.
And that was kind of what I was talking about getting that list and prioritizing it, and this is for Preston, like, is that something we can do during the normal cycle, when it's not a moratorium, is put a couple of those items on the agendas and work through things that we want to update?
You know, that's a good question. The answer is yes and no. You know, I hate to be that guy, but I'll be that guy, you know, with a very small staff with a very specific work plan and a very robust work plan at that throughout the course of each year. And, you know, tagging on, you know, code updates, not really knowing the scope of what those code updates might be can be pretty substantial and daunting. And so, you know, we're in the process now of budgeting. We're on the tail end of that, proud of that. And what comes with that is the annual, the drafting of the annual strategic plan, right? Lays out priorities for the upcoming fiscal year and essentially the work plan for staff. If there's a desire to start talking about changing other sections of the code, because that's what I'm hearing. If you have ideas for changing other sections of the code or performance standards, whatever they may be, that's fantastic. But my thought and recommendation would be it needs to happen, you know, in a very coordinated, thoughtful, and strategic way, and not piecemeal throughout the course of the year, because that can get very messy and convoluted, especially for staff as we're trying to, you know, check things off and get things done, and it just becomes difficult. I don't know if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense, but my next question is then how do we go about doing that? Because I know John had some things with affordable housing getting included in, there's stuff that we wanted to address outside of this process. And so I want to line up, how do we do that?
If I may,
Go
one
ahead.
option is just like Preston said, right? Get it into work plan, budget it, and direct staff to do it through budgeting and strategic plan process. Just to clarify up here, the second line down. So we need to change that. We change it in some places. Map amendment is zoning. Text amendment. That's the process that we would go through to make changes in the future. So here's your process. A couple of things that we can certainly do. On the 16th of the following week, we'll have this list of standards. Then presumably over the next couple of months, we'll prioritize those, determine what needs to be done before the moratorium is lifted and what can wait. Then there's always an opportunity, and we did this for a reason. I'm a little smarter than I look sometimes. That the idea is to get to a point where, if desired, we can go after a DOLA grant to help facilitate and fund a larger code update or code update elements afterwards. So that's due in about February. So if we want to talk about a larger project, if you will, to devote time, like a consultant, to do those, that's what we're trying to set up so that we're a little bit ahead. It's unfortunately we weren't able to do this before the town budgeting process, but there's that opportunity too. So if you're like, hey, we really want to do, and this is where I've been saying, like, to do a real housing, affordable housing program. One, it's not really our expertise. That's more of a financial component to it. But that's a larger project.
We can put standards in, but they're not gonna do you any good if you don't have someone managing the money and the inventory. Things like that.
I'll
Right.
let John speak to this after I say, I think it's really important because I think otherwise time goes by so fast and we look back at all the things we should have done. And, you know, we've talked about it. I've been here for a year in April, 2 years, I don't know, a while. And it's been talked about, but it's like, okay, not now, but when. So I'm saying when, and what are your thoughts on it? I know there's some things you wanted to address.
I think TJ and Katie make a good point that it's a bigger issue than just trying to shoehorn it into this process.
I agree, but when?
I think it's probably a question for council. Russ and I need to go back and say, here's what's happening at planning commission. What do you guys think about, trying to build something into the strategic plan for 23 that makes, makes plans for trying to get some of this stuff done.
And possibly the DOLA thing, maybe, you know, but I just think I just want to stress that I think it's super important. Because otherwise it's just talk and it doesn't happen.
Well, and I'm wondering if there's things we can do during this part of the process to, like, I heard at the beginning, right, like we're creating this framework, so it's very easy to make those changes.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if there
Easier.
are,
Yeah.
well, right, but that's what I'm wondering though, if there are things we could set up now, if we know affordable housing is one of the issues, that the language, so we don't have to go back and rewrite. Like if there's a way to,
It's possible for some of them that are simple, but I think that some of them, like, let's just take landscape regs, because TJ's doing that as manager.
Did it here, we're not touching the regs, they're perfect.
But the other, we already did that. Approximately how big of a project was it?
That was over 6 months and
Yeah.
Well,
And I
that's
don't even have a specific issue that I'm after. I just know there are
Yeah.
some.
And that's why I just,
Yeah.
so I think Preston gave you a really good answer. You can't, I don't think the town, unless the town council really considers the priorities and puts it in their plan, they can't just say, let's go fix this, this, and this, because they might be very in-depth 6-month processes that are gonna take a lot of writing to get it right.
So can you bring that to
It's got a lot of
council
steps
and get it started
Correct,
anyway?
as well as that.
And I think it should be planned for the upcoming years, like what stuff, it should have a place marker, I would think. For the foreseeable future, each year. I might be getting crazy here, but if we want to stay up on things, like, you know, we need to catch up and then we need to stay caught up.
so I would opine that the scope of what you're talking about needs to be clear, because it's not clear to me, and I think in the email or whatever correspondence you put together by 5:01 PM on December 16th, it should be included in that. And that could help at that, you know.
Well, the problem is I don't have specific issues. I just know there will be a list and we will then need to prioritize it. And then we pick 1 or 2 or 2 or 3 and like, where do they fit in? It's like, if we're gonna bother to do the work, then when does it happen? Otherwise, it's just an exercise in futility.
Well, and again, I mean, I think part of that is part of the process we're doing. So for example, home occupations, travel homes, accessory dwelling units. The accessory dwelling units is a simple one. That we all know that affordable housing is an issue here. We want to increase the housing stock and type of housing to increase the affordability of living. ADUs is a perfect way to do that. So what we can easily do through this process is look at those supplemental regulations and say, okay, are they allowed in a detached? Are they allowed in a attached? Are there any standards in there that we can change through this process to move that needle, right? Well, we're not going to create an affordable housing program. We can look at short-term rentals, right? And do some things in that where it's related to land use.
Well, and these seems like really easy things for
Correct.
council to jump on board,
Well,
right?
these
So
are
that's
things-
easy. These are popular.
Yeah.
Probably true, but you don't, there's so many different ways you can handle them,
And
that it's more thought for each one.
Mhm.
Like, we don't wanna just say, oh, this works great for this town, let's put this in Ridgway, because then they'll have something and they ask for it. So I just want you to keep that in mind, like,
Uh-huh.
we can pull so many examples that we think are great, but I wanna put time, I think anyone wanna put good time, so I think we can definitely give you the list of what probably could be updated in the future, and then you can prioritize,
Yeah,
like you
that's-
said, and I think that would make sense.
Perfect. And then in the meantime,
Oh,
if it
yeah.
can be presented to council so that there might be a little bit of space where we actually work on those things next year. Maybe 1 or 2, but it's something.
And you know, so clear, so you're clear, council's already had in this year's budget discussions, lots of talk about affordable housing, we put a lot of money into that line item. You know, it's a, but as they're pointing out, there's so many different options, there's so much grant money out there. I think what I caution you to not put too much emphasis on the idea that we're just gonna like, come up with a list and here's what we're gonna do and it's gonna be great because it's just way more complicated. If there was an easy set of tools that worked, everybody would be doing them, but there aren't. They're different for every community. So I guess all I'm saying is that council's already working on it. We're already putting money where our mouth is, so to speak. And you know, I think the things that you're talking about, us making time for next year, nobody really knows what those things are yet. So I think it's a work in progress.
Okay, but
Looks like
I feel like we have to start somewhere. And if there's a deadline to blocking out the time or the money and it's coming up, then we should do that, even though we want to
already
keep
happened.
our code updated.
I think it's already.
And I don't think that stops us from having a conversation.
Right, but conversations don't change anything. We have to do
Everything
everything.
starts with a
But they
conversation.
can move
Yeah.
to a space of having a clear presentation of what would actually work.
Well, right, but then we're into 2020. All I'm saying is we should get started.
But I'm hearing we
Michelle, if
are.
I may, have you read through the strategic plan that's proposed for 2023 yet?
No,
If I may, I would recommend that you do that just to see if some of the items or thoughts that you're really thinking about are addressed even in some form or fashion in that document. And John did a great job just saying there's a substantial amount of money. It's a relative term, a substantial amount of money devoted towards affordable housing initiatives and projects, undertakings for 2023.
okay,
So I think it is-
that's great. And it's not even a specific cause. I just want to keep moving on this.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it'd be a good start to just put your eye to that document and see how it might mesh with what you're thinking.
And that's available online?
And it's available online in the last 3 town council packet, or the last 2 at least, the November 17th standalone budget workshop packet, regular meeting of November 9th. So I would probably just check out the November 17th.
Okay.
Does anyone have any other general feedback on the process or anything they looked at so far for tonight? Or I know we got a lot of keep going with what you've got, but if there's anything anyone else had that you wanted to bring up, we're happy to hear it while we're all together.
I had one note. Go ahead.
No, I said, no.
Oh. I was wondering about the language of referral agencies. Felt a little bit confusing to me. I didn't know if that was like a standard or if there was,
As far as who's listed or the way we worded it to lead up to.
well, just like when I saw referral agencies, I thought, and then
Got
I
it,
read
okay.
further, I was like, I don't know. if
Yeah,
that's the best way
that's
to
a
do
great
that.
point. It is the standard, so we don't think about it, because like TJ mentioned earlier, sometimes things are just so ingrained in us, so that's a good point. We can.
Could just be mine.
And also, and I don't know if this would go in there, but one thing I meant to say is that all uses and everything is also gonna get checked with definitions. If there's a final step that we do. So as a side note, your definitions are gonna get really beefed up also. However, with that said. Yeah, I don't know if you would answer, because it's just natural to us to think we're all.
I guess I wondered, do you have a concern with it or just understanding with?
Well, just in terms of clarity for
Yeah.
the reader, right?
Yeah.
As someone who's
So-
newer to this
Yeah.
process, it
Yeah.
was confusing to me.
I'd be just a little bit cautious to change it too much. Just because state agencies who get it, we work with the same individuals in 5 different communities. And it's all, email is a referral notice for this project, right? So what it means is that the town is referring an application to an agency to get their feedback and review of a proposal. So that's CDOT, Department of Natural Resources, the Colorado Geological Survey, right? A lot of the state agencies, as well as the fire districts, water districts, sewer districts, things like that.
Okay.
And so it's I would say it's a standard process
That's
across the
fine.
board.
We'll look at how we wrote the intro to it though, to see if it explains what
Clarify.
it is. Yeah.
I just
Not
didn't
to
realize that was a
any-
part of the
Yeah, so
process,
maybe
so it
we
was
look
like-
at leading into it a little bit better.
And any developer that's had any experience is good.
They would know that.
We know. what
Yeah,
that
okay.
is.
Like highway turnoffs, you have to go to CDOT or any type of development, right, that's gonna access the highway to do I wanted to say feasibility study, but I don't think that's right.
Access permit is what they issue.
A better
That's
example
fine.
is Parks and Wildlife. Giving feedback on whether or not there's a wildlife corridor and stuff.
Okay. Great, thank you.
And I'm excited about that because frankly, there are times where I sit here and give a presentation. And I don't know if any of these agencies don't have comments or not. I don't know if they have the opportunity to review it. That's not really a good spot to be, right?
Do they let you know when they receive the notification?
So we have a whole process that we do, and then we follow up with them, send comments to us. We have them in the packet. We got a couple of comments for Four Winds, but I think that's because one of the adjacent property owners actually forwarded it to CBW.
I think it's
Um,
great.
Right,
It's
it's
really important.
Yeah, and it gives credibility then during a hearing to say, well, we've reached out to,
yeah.
these agencies.
And the other part too is right now, basically we put the onus on the developer, the applicant, to do all that coordination. The town is almost relying on them to say that they've confirmed it. We, through the Riverfront Village project, we never really got too much confirmation from CDOT that the access permit was approved and that what they were looking at versus what we were looking at. Because the applicant was sending something to CDOT, sending something to us. Whereas if we're the keeper of that whole process, they submit it to us, we send it to CDOT, CDOT then sends us back, exactly what they were reviewing, what their comments were, what their concerns were, and now we can make that happen, right?
Which is what you said at the beginning, it's staff's responsibility.
Correct.
Yep.
And then the applicant can also do that on their own?
Correct, they should do that beforehand. That's where this, say they came in or with a pre-application meeting and say, hey, go talk to CDOT, you're changing your access, make sure you don't need a new access permit. Right, get that done early on. Hey, your
And then
fire flows might be a little odd over here. Make sure that you're working with fire district, fire protection district to make sure that there's adequate flows. We know there's some wildlife habitat up here. Why don't you go talk to CBW before you submit? So we have those answers when the residents come in and say, hey, did you realize there's an elk migratory pattern up here during, winter habitat or something? We sound more intelligent.
And it helps the applicants out. We have one, so I don't know if you, and I apologize, I don't know if this is relevant here. There is one area of the state where Excel has them. And everybody, no one used to go to Excel, and then every project got held up at construction because they didn't have room for a transformer. And everything had to be 10 feet back from the transformer. So now electric companies are realizing are extremely important to get in the loop at the very beginning, because if they don't have good meter or transformer locations, projects have to go all the way back to redesign. So we're finding just more and more need to go to those agencies to be helpful for the applicant, so they don't get approval and then the whole project gets rejected at construction because of some other agency.
Anyone else have questions or comments?
Sounds good. Good work.
Do you guys have anything else?
Hey, no, it's great being here though and seeing you all. Thank you very much
Walls
for
in our
that.
court, gotta do our.
Yes, I know we took up a lot of your time, but we appreciate you letting us
That's good.
go through it.
Preston, can you send out a reminder to everyone on planning, well before that date to remember to get their comments in, just a quick.
We can do that, sure.
And then who are we sending them to? You?
I think we can just send them to me directly and I'll shoot them over to Katie and TJ.
Great.
Now, I would also say, I think you all have our contact information too. But please, if you're reading through and have a question, call. I think that's probably the simplest way to do it.
Okay.
Like, hey, I just don't understand how this is functioning. I read this as a conflict over there. Probably easier just to talk through some of that stuff. Than it is to try to put it in writing and be like, delayed another month. But again, I want to be available and responsive to your reviews over the next 2 weeks. I guess is what I'm saying.
Especially if it
Thank you.
saves you time
Yeah.
from trying to write questions in an email that are hard to, and then us trying to understand and misinterpret.
And the flow charts will be inserted later.
Yeah, we can show you an example. We actually have all of them drafted. However, they all have to be updated at the last step to write the section numbers, and we didn't want to do it over and over and over. So we have them all ready, and this is what they all will look like. Thank you. Thanks for reminding us, because we did want to show you. So basically, this has been created for each step in the code for every application type. This would be in PUD zoning, and it will actually be a visual in the code where we wrote insert flow chart. And it just helps. All of it is exactly what's written in text, but a lot of people are gonna be able to follow this a little easier. So we're trying to also cater to everybody's kind of reading, learning style.
What'd you say?
I said he should post that on his door.
We can come up with one. Amy, our graphic designer, is excellent. We'll have her.
Before you knock, please read.
That'd be funny. You should have Amy as.
I guess that just reminds me of a quick comment. It's sort of like, it's almost like a graphic design question. That there's so many charts in the draft. I'm trying to find the one that, I mean, they're great, but it'd be really nice if they could somehow be, some of them are too big to be on one page, and I'm just like the one that's
Table of uses.
the land use table.
Yes, yeah, where when you're on one page, you can't see what the heading is.
Will and fiction. Yes, thank you.
The other thing, it's hard to see and understand, I think, with PDFs, but all of this can easily be migrated into Unicode. Right, so it all,
And it's just scrolling.
yep, and everything where you see parentheses and we put like XX.X or whatever, those will all be hyperlinks. And we'll put in those code sections. So when you see section this or chapter, things like that, they'll all be, we've designed this, maybe not designed, we've laid it out and put it together in a way that it is going to be functional on Unicode.
And in case you're not aware, Unicode is the company that hosts the online version of the Ridgway Municipal Code, and they provide codification services for our code books.
Will you send everybody, send the P and Z a link to that so that everybody has a chance to look at what code looks like now, if they haven't already got it?
And include these guys' contacts so that we have it handy.
Yeah, there's an example.
So this is Unicode right now. So it's
I
all
use this a lot. I don't know how many of you know about it and have ever used
It's
it.
a great tool because you can search, well, same as the PDF, but you can search for a word on here too. I really like your point though, because I frequently do everything with PDFs and I can't stand when I don't see the top, and that is something that we can easily do. So I will, even for the ones you see, I don't know how to do it, but I know people, but we'll make it work.
There are a few places on the homepage of the website where you can navigate, click Ridgway Municipal Code, that takes you to Unicode's website.
Okay.
Do you guys have anything else?
So more of a logistical question. We gave you all PDFs. Does anybody want Word documents? Now, mind you, there's some significant formatting in there, so that's why we did it. Is everyone okay with PDFs?
Yeah.
Okay. And then actually, Preston, is it all in the Dropbox or did you email them? I apologize.
It's in Dropbox.
It's in Dropbox, yeah.
So the same one or theirs?
There's
Okay.
your special one.
Yeah.
I was like, what's different? I was
Well,
actually really stumped on
So
that.
because there were so many, I sent them to Preston, I put them into our Dropbox. CBS's Dropbox, sent them
And
to
share
Preston.
it, share it.
Yeah, so I didn't know if you just sent the link to that or?
No, he,
Thought you meant they had their own code. I didn't know about it. They were coming.
Need more licenses or something.
no, just a few.
Anyway, anything else?
No, just for you to, if you're finish up your.
So do I need to close this then to move on?
No.
You just keep going. So next is approval of the minutes from October 25th. And if you weren't at that meeting, then don't vote on it.
So moved.
Second,
Were you
Do a
here?
roll call on that? Roll
Sure.
call.
Yeah.
Okay, Commissioner Franz. Aye. Lisk. Aye. Nelson.
I,
Petroselli.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Meyer,
aye.
Mayor Clark,
Hi,
and Chair Peter Montague.
Aye. Guess we were all there.
were we all?
Yeah.
No.
Next item is the update regarding regular meeting schedule, which we kind of covered.
We've already covered that.
We're good.
That
Okay.
will be Meeting January 10th, 2023.
I'd like to add that the town Christmas party is a week from Friday. Hopefully everyone got that notice and can attend.
Be fun.
And it's right here. It'll be like a meeting, but not, but with food and drink.
Only with alcohol.
It'll be
Right.
noticed.
Good. And then updates from planning commission members. Do we have any updates? John, thank you for taking that to council and thank you for having already addressed it. Anyone online got anything? I'm gonna move to adjourn this meeting.
Just adjourn. Thanks, everybody.
Oops.
Everyone.
Lay it down.